fire up a poll here real quick. We're live, but first of all, let's do that. Putting up the poll, putting up the... Got it. We're up. Boom. Bingo. Bingo, bango, bongo. So tonight we're going to talk about throttle body size on the 5-liter Ford. And if we go back to yesteryear, 80s and early to mid 90s, and obviously it went way into, I mean, it's still going on now. And I would say now people are embracing this more certainly than we did back in the day. But if you look at the throttle body sizes, I mean, a factory throttle body was tiny. It was, I think, 60 millimeters or even slightly smaller than that, depending on how you measured it. And so the upgrades for the throttle bodies back then for different kinds of intake manifolds for like your GT40s and System X's and Cobras, and Edelbrock had some, just all the different intake manifolds. If you look at those, we had 65 millimeter throttle body. You were really making some power then. And then they came out with 70s and 75s and eventually 90s. The problem was, and I wanted to ask you guys about this, is, on the 90 millimeter, we didn't have a lot of intake manifolds that would accept that. Now, later on, we got some like the Box R intake manifold. I think it might have been that some of the Hartman Box or Downs or what was it called? The Cartec, those box manifolds that you put on the lower manifolds for 5-liter Fords. I think some of those might have been had a large enough opening to accept a 90 millimeter throttle body. But looking back at that and looking at what we compare now, I mean, we got factory cars coming with 90 millimeter throttle bodies, and like in the LS side, we have 102 and 105 millimeter throttle bodies. And there's even been stuff that's 125 millimeter throttle bodies. So there's certainly bigger ones now. I know the guys from AccuFab, so shout out to John at AccuFab, who has always done a fantastic job on all the throttle body stuff and went through all of the Ford stuff, from the 5-liter stuff into the modular Ford stuff and the Coyote stuff and all that. So he does lots of throttle bodies for different stuff. And they're always like, some of the best around. And so he's been through that since day one. And it's and I may have even done some of the Grand National stuff and things like that. But if you look back then, we look at the throttle bodies and we're like, because I remember thinking this. I know I was there. So I remember thinking this. I had a 5-liter Mustang. I still have a 5-liter Mustang. And I remember thinking back then, testing some of these throttle bodies on these things. I'm like, yeah, this 90 millimeter throttle body is gigantic. This is a race only thing. There's no reason that you would ever need this. And for a lot of these intake manifolds, you wouldn't ever need that, because there's no sense in, we've talked about this. There's no sense in putting a 90 millimeter throttle body on an inlet opening like on a GT40. That would just be ridiculous, because it would just be nothing but overhang, basically. And the same thing for these other things. Even if you even if you had enough material there where you could taper it out and meet up to the 90, it isn't going to do you any good if the rest of the inlet tube / plenum volume for these typical kind of 5-liter Mustang things, if it's not big enough. I mean, if that's the restriction, you could put a 200 millimeter throttle body on there. It's not going to do anything. And so once you get to manifolds like the Box R intake manifold that TrickFlow offered and others, where you had a big enough opening, then, because I would argue that if you look at a lot of these manifolds, the power output that they made, if you put them on a, let's say your typical kind of 302 or 306 or even a 331 or a 347 kind of thing with airflow research heads and, a decent cam, the 224 cam in it, put something like that together. And then if you put a stock intake manifold, it's going to be terrible. If you put a GT40 intake manifold, it's going to be a little bit less than terrible. Well, a little bit better than terrible, let's say. It'll be one step up. It'll be terrible plus one. And then as you start going up into better manifolds, it will start making more and more power. But back then, we wouldn't have put, I wouldn't have put a 90 millimeter throttle body on anything that was street oriented, probably. I mean, it just wasn't done because and if you look at that big an opening on these motors, you're like, yeah, it makes it super responsive, and it does. But now you look at all of this stuff is just like normal, I on an intake manifold anymore for an LS. If it has a 102 millimeter opening or 105 millimeter opening, it's getting a 105 millimeter throttle body because I'm not going to restrict it unless we're doing a throttle body test. So, things have come a long way since the days of I remember putting my first 65 millimeter throttle body on. I'm like, oh, look at this. Look how much bigger this is. This is going to be way better. And then that was an upgrade. And it's just like every performance guy, like, I think that this is why people are so infatuated with things like flat plane cranks, because I think it goes back to us being able to list all of the things that make our thing like cool. So the modifications, because I still get this to this day, and I got it a lot more early on, and especially with the magazines, is guys would list like, oh yeah, it's got silicone plug wires, and it's got these kinds of plugs in it, and it's got this coil on it, and it's got it's got these valve covers or these shorty headers, whatever it's got, and they're listing off a lot of things. You're like, okay, that's great that you put that on there. A lot of that stuff doesn't really do anything. It just doesn't add any power. It's like me bragging to people that I use Arco graphite. I'm like, first of all, that's a horrible idea anymore now that we know what we know. But it was just one of those things. You list off all of these things that, I got this super fan or whatever. Underdrive pulleys were kind of a real thing. But the 65 millimeter throttle body, and we even back then, my first 65 millimeter throttle body was something where we opened up the mouth of the stock HO upper and lower intake manifold. I remember porting it. I remember going in and port matching and porting the entry and exit and stuff. We can't get in there very far unless you extrude hone it, and they did a really good job of that stuff, or unless you cut the back of it off and then weld it back on, and then you could do that. But it's still hard to get to even the lower is just not great. And it takes a lot of, it's not as bad as porting cast iron, obviously, but doing aluminum is still with the weird kind of, especially runners 1 and 5, or as they have to snake around the distributor. It's not great for, for porting, but extrude honing work really, really good for that stuff. But when we port match that out again, is that doing anything? Like, is that the part of it that's restrictive? But once you'd put a real intake manifold on there, like you'd put let's say a high ram now, put a high ram on there. If you ran that might be an interesting test. If you ran a 60 millimeter throttle body or a 65 millimeter throttle body, and then put a 90 or a 102, like God and nature intended it to be, then it would be interesting to see how much restriction was there and what the throttle body was actually doing. Because back in the day, if you had one of these intake manifolds on there, a GT40, a Cobra, Celine, a System X, or whatever, some of it was certainly the throttle body, but some of it was also the intake manifold itself. It's the design, it's the runner length, it's the flow rate of that manifold. There's a lot of things that are conspiring together to make that thing want to make power in a given range, and then flow the amount that it flows. And then if you could port it, you could make more. And unless you shorten the runner, you're not going to greatly change, the RPM, the functioning or the effective RPM range of the manifold if the runner length stays the same. Yeah, you can flow more. That's great. But the reflected wave is still going to happen at the same RPM, in the same RPM range. And then if you put a bigger throttle body on it, if we port it and get the rest of the manifold to flow, let's say we'll just use arbitrary numbers. Let's say each of the runners flows 200. Okay. And then we port it, extrude hone it, or port it, or the big dog guys or whatever port it, and now it flows 300. Okay. That's great. Now there's more of a reason for us to run a bigger throttle body on there, or the front part of an intake manifold that has enough flow to now support the flow rate of the intake manifold. And then you start looking at other things. Okay, well, if you got an intake manifold that flows 300, do you have cylinder heads that flow 300? And even if you do, even if both of those things now flow 300, you want to make sure that the throttle body supports all of that. But also, do you have a motor that, if you got stuff that flows 300 CFM, do you have a 302 or a 331 or a 347 that's going to be a 600 horsepower one? Probably not. I mean, there was maybe a handful of those that I've ever seen that would do something like that. And it would have to have the right kind of intake. And that's not usually any kind of long runner, factory, two-piece kind of intake manifold that we associate with the 5-liter stuff back in the day. The high Rammy stuff, I think, would be good now. I think it'd be interesting to try that. Lots of the higher power stuff used, and this is probably where I see more big throttle bodies than anything else, is they use a single plane with port EFI. And now they could also use a 4-hole throttle body with that kind of injection, but port EFI and then an elbow. And then the elbow was like a Holley elbow or other people. And then that would have a 102 millimeter throttle body on it. So then that that isn't a restriction on a 5-liter Ford. If you then connected that to a factory mass air meter, or even like a 77 millimeter Pro M mass air meter, that's not going to flow as much as 102 or 105 millimeter throttle body that you have on your elbow. And so again, you got to look at everything, every little restriction along the way, and find out, okay, how do you make it speed density. First of all, get rid of the mass air meter. But if you're running it as a factory, still tuning it with an E4 or something like an A9L or something, and you're still doing it with that, kind of good luck on that setup, especially if you're running a big cam and everything. You can do it, but it takes a lot of work that way. But as you make all those modifications, that's how we have to think about it. Is the air intake or the mass air restrictive? Is the throttle body restrictive? Is the elbow? Is the intake manifold? Are the ports? Is the head? And then once we do all that, do we have enough motor to even take advantage of that stuff? Those are all concerns for the performance guy. For drivability's sake, the smaller is better. Yeah, the big throttle bodies just tend to be, the opening rate and the amount of airflow that you get relative to the throttle change, the throttle position change, can make them kind of jumpy. Usually that can be tuned out of it. And certainly with a drive-by-wire one, that can be tuned out of it. Started my wastegate and blow-off valve. Way to go. We like that. It's raining here in Melbourne. Australia's in the house. Today was beautiful. In fact, I don't know if you guys will be able to see it. I caught another snake today. It was awesome. Let's see if I can make you see that. There we go. Oh, there we go. That's a good one. Then I got to come back into focus. That is a baby king snake. I don't see as many king snakes as I would like. Usually 1, 2, 3, maybe a year. And so it was awesome to go out. I just went out by where my son used to play soccer and just walked along the rocks and stuff out there cruising, looking for snakes. And this guy was just chilling next to a rock. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And they're so nice and chill. This guy was so chill and docile. He's like, oh, okay, you're going to pick me up and I'll crawl around and it's all good. Darren, I miss the videos where you're screaming in the back door. Poor neighbors. Oh, on the tree fort ones? Yeah. Puppet Master, what's going on? YouTube ad, literally 90 seconds, unskippable. That's not good. What about a 5-liter with a Kenny Bell? That is good. And that's actually where I would say I did my first kind of real testing with throttle body stuff on the Kenny Bell. Well, I take that back. I think we did it with an elbow that one of the drag racer guys had. Might have even been Ben Alameda, maybe. Somebody like that did a test at West Tech, and he had like a 427 or something. We were doing throttle body stuff on that. But I remember doing the Kenny Bell stuff and going up. And once it was discovered that, hey, look, these throttle bodies, and because Jim did the Flowzilla and the Blowzilla and all that. And so once they realized that, hey, let's put really big inlets on this thing, then life gets a lot better for the blower. And when you do that, and there's not vacuum between the throttle body and the supercharger, which there definitely was on their setup, on their standard setup, once you get a big inlet going in and a big opening, all of a sudden the blower's like, yes, now we're in let's party mode. I like the sound of a V8 with a flat plane crank. Okay. Got to find the greatest point of restriction within the whole intake track. Yep. Speaking of restriction, Put a tight 90-degree bend right in front of the throttle body and see how much power you lose. A bigger throttle body won't fix that. So like are you talking about like the elbows? You think the elbows are restrictive? Get away, what's going on? The flying toilet, yep. I've read the resistance gets reduced the straighter you can make a port. Yeah, a bent tube flows less than a straight tube of equal size. But again, if we have a port that flows 300 CFM, let's say it's straight, and then we bend that because it's going to have to be bent because that's how almost all intakes are. And certainly the head is going to be that to some extent relative to the intake manifold. And we bend it and we reduce it from 300 CFM to 280 or 270 CFM on a 400 horsepower motor. That doesn't make any difference at all. I have a 331 with a turbo and a box R. Will a 75, will a 90 help? No, on a blow through setup, when you're pressurizing the intake manifold and the throttle body in this case, a 90 is not going to help you at all. Richard, is a cam with 114 LSA on a 109 centerline going to lose top end? Compared to what? What are you comparing it to? 226, 234 is not a really big split. So if you want more top end, you'd have a wider split. And then the 114 is probably fine. You could gain more by going to even wider LSA. But it's not just those individual things. It's all of the valve events that are happening. How accurate are those estimated horsepower torque calculations on software such as HB tuners and Haltech, etc.? I don't know. I've never looked at them. The estimated horsepower could be accurate if it's based on mass flow, but it would still assume that other things are right. Like you have the right amount of air fuel and you have the right amount of timing. Top fuel is limited to 65 square inches of throttle body, equivalent to a 9.1 inch throttle body. Yeah. Well, they're limited, but they're limited to 10 or 15,000 horsepower. So they're doing just fine. I think that they're good. They got a bunch of 65 or 90 millimeter throttle bodies. Is a 75 millimeter or smaller the reason why 5-liter Ford motors didn't make much power? 72% no. Is there a low ram style intake for small block Ford, or do I have to go ITBs? I don't know if Holley makes a low ram or not. I've only ever heard of their high ram. What is it you're trying to make, Jim? Like, what kind of power are you trying to make? On twin screw blowers, is there a point where they will? Are you going to leave us in suspense? You're going to leave us hanging? Top fuel runs nitromethane, which actually adds oxygen after the throttle bodies. Yeah, they get a really big percentage of their power from the fuel. Where a point where they will no longer make boosts at higher RPM? No, because that's never going to happen. Because a throttle body, if the throttle body becomes a restriction, it doesn't stop it from making boost. Usually just the power curve will level off. Just something that fits under the early Mustang hood. Yeah, you're kind of limited there for hood clearance. Even like some dual planes, like an RPM air gap, might not fit under there with a carburetor and an air cleaner. Hood clearance is kind of a pain for a lot of situations. That's why Cal hoods are so cool. I like those because they had like just enough. Even though Ford didn't have a Cal hood like a 69 Z28 did, it still looks cool and solves that problem. If there would be any difference, if this is a factory ECU question, I probably am the wrong guy, but if there would be any difference in factory 0411 ECU that came from a 2003 S10 or the 00411 that came from an LS Camaro? Could they both be programmed the same way? Does anybody know, is the S10 a 4-cylinder? I don't know if, does a factory ECU have all of the drivers that when it was designed to work with a 4-cylinder? Does anybody know? Top fuel engines will still make over 3,000 horsepower with the throttle body closed, simply on fuel and no additional air. Oh, it's a 4.3 V6. Okay, so 6 versus 8. Does anybody know? I don't know enough on the factory ECUs to know if all the drivers are there and they're only using some of them, or if they made different ECUs with only the correct number of drivers. It'd be nice to make them all the same. I think it'd be easier, but it might ultimately be cheaper to do it the other way. The ECUs themselves might be less expensive with fewer drivers. And if that was a way to save money, I'm sure that they would go that way. I just don't know what they do. What are tumble ports and what are swirl ports? I don't know what the difference is between those two. They might be, it might be a situation where the different OEMs are calling heads that induce mixture motion different things. Is a DHL master rebuild kit okay for my 4.8? I'm rebuilding this week for shop. I don't know. I've never tried a DHL master kit, a rebuild kit. They put 2.2s in the S10s. That's what I thought he was talking about initially. I thought it was the 4-cylinder. 2 valve heads use swirl and 4 valve heads use tumble. I don't know how they induce tumble in a 4 valve head. In the Honda 4-valve, in the VX anyway, they induce swirl by opening one valve before the other, one intake valve before the other. I believe you can segment swap with an 0411 PCM. You can choose which engine, trans. Okay. I know that people were saying that that's the computer to use when they do the LS harness and coil packs and stuff, when they do that upgrade on the earlier LT1s, on the Gen 2 LT1s, but I don't know if there were specific ones. Any advice for my shop van rebuild? Maybe a little torque upgrade. Well, if it's a 4.8, then a cam or boost is really, headers will help low end. Making it a 5.3 will help with low end a lot rather than a 4.8. Definitely stay with some kind of long runner intake, the truck intake, a Trailblazer SS, that kind of thing. Don't go with a fabricated, shiny, billowy aluminum looking one, because it's going to lose a bunch of low speed power. A converter helps a lot on a 4.8. Gears in a 4.8, if I don't know what gears you have in that application, but gears will definitely help. Anything to get the 4.8 up into making steam. What can you do with a speed density 302 to make power in an 87 town car? I don't know on the factory ECU. I remember the speed densities not being real conducive to camshafts and stuff. So boost you might be able to get away with, but almost all of the Mustangs and stuff, I didn't see too many town cars having that done to them. But all of the Mustang stuff, any speed density thing, got a mass air upgrade before it got other mods done to it, like a cam or heads or intake manifolds. A HEMI head and a wedge head. Ports don't induce tumble or swirl. The valve train configuration does. I'm just trying to visualize how tumble happens. Is it tumble because of valve angle relative to the piston? Like, is it coming off of the valve and going straight down? If a built 4.6 valve engine and cylinder heads are capable, I'm juggling the idea of either taking my engine for 7,000, 7,800 for more power, or just a smaller pulley, my race ported twin screw. You have a race ported twin screw? Like you went in and modified the screws somehow? Or did you... Is it a Kenny Bell? I'm hoping that you didn't that you didn't open up the discharge or that kind of thing. The right size one will support a lot of power, and then a big inlet going into the blower will help that. But I've never seen anybody port one of those. I've seen guys do that to roots blowers. A friend of mine is building a truck 4.8. They're putting in a stroker crank to make a 6.0 or 6.2. He said it was cheap enough just to go ahead with it. So he's going to put a 4-inch stroke in that. You can make that 4.8 into a 383. You can also make it into something smaller than that. Whipple race ported competition blower by Whipple, 3-liter Gen 5. Okay, I'm not familiar with that. I'll have to take a look and see what it is. Yeah, a 383 will be good. We've made lots of power. I've made 600 with an NA 383, so you can have it be really. It's going to be a lot torqueier than a 4.8 is. And if you are replacing, and I've said this for years on small block Fords and small block Chevys and stuff, and big block stuff too, if you're going to be replacing the pistons and rods and especially the crank, just make it bigger. just like nobody buys new rods and pistons in a crank for a 454 Chevy. You definitely would build a 496. Same thing with a 350 Chevy. You wouldn't just build 350 stuff. You'd make it a 383. And on a small block Ford, you'd definitely do either a 331 or a 347. I mean, why would you just do a 302 when it's just going to be better? Rebuild is because the DOD let go. Yeah, that can happen. Yeah, that's not good. I'm surprised on the MDS, cylinder displacement or something like that, or MSD, whatever the HEMI version of that is. I remember running mine, and we just put plugs in it and just ran it with the lifters that were in there. I mean, we were only going to 60, it's 6,500 or less. So we put a cam in it and stuff, and we still ran those lifters. Because I didn't know any better. So sometimes you just try stuff and it works out. In your experience testing 4-valve, 4V engines, how often do they make peak power at upper 7,000 RPM ranges? It's very easy to get them to make power up there because they have the RPM potential. So then you just have to put, the things that you need. You have to have enough head flow, which those usually do. So if you look at a Coyote, getting it to make power at 7,500 or 8,000, that's not hard at all. Will you offer a smaller set of twin turbos in your store, something around 800 horsepower with like 2 turbos versus 1? Twins are more eye-pleasing. The smallest I think that we're going to do are the G30s. But they will definitely work at 800 horsepower. I think a rolled up sticky bun pastry swirl would sit on top of the piston. Tumble would be the roll stood up on the side of the cylinder. Tumble works better for power, swirl for emissions. Yeah, I don't know that. Like, I would think both of those would be more for fuel mileage, for mixture motion. So emissions and fuel mileage. I don't know that are those power things? I remember we could push power pretty high on a 4.6 4V motor with cams in it. And we had ported navigator heads, I think. And then we ran the dual runner FR500 manifold, but with a short runner only. And that made power pretty high up there. Mohovitz's stuff runs to 9,500 when he was running his 4.6. So not too hard to get them to rev. Big, crazy power. Throttle body size. I think now that the throttle body that's on my truck, that's bigger than the 75. Man, if you had a 75 on your 5-liter Mustang, you were something. I was under the impression tumble and swirl were for better fuel air mixing at low RPM, low load. That's what I thought too. I thought that was more of a fuel mileage emissions thing. I know that Honda was employing it on the VX to get like mixture motion so that the thing wouldn't misfire at really, really ultra lean, was going into ultra lean burn. I have the comp cam stage 3 blower cams. Wonder if I can take them to 8,000. Yes, those cams are big enough to definitely go to 8,000. But the cams by themselves will not do that. You have to have short intake runner length to make it up there. And then you have to be able to support both of those things with enough airflow from the cylinder head. Cylinder heads, both of them. Because if the heads don't support continued power up there, it just kind of levels off. So you need all the power. Big boy power. Top chat, live chat. 70% no. That's not why. That's not why, Richard. That's not why they didn't make power. You can measure tumble and swirl on the flow bench with a little propeller thingy. Look at the HEMI valve angle. Can't help but tumble into the cylinder. Yeah. And if you add enough broken piston parts and stuff, it just tumbles right in there. That's one thing I haven't I've done a lot of flow bench testing, but I haven't done any of that. And I've done very little of like putting the probes in different spots to find out if they're dead zones and all that. Because I'm not really a head porter, so that stuff is not it was not my wheelhouse. The testing that I would be doing would just be comparing one head to the other head and go, okay, like this one at 50, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, however high we're going to test it. All of those tested on the same fixture, test them all and just kind of see how they compare. Let's get a rough idea. I don't even remember measuring like pinch points and stuff like that. But I did do, we measured all of the valve springs. We measured all the valve train mass. We measured all the port volumes, measured all the chamber volumes. So it was a lot of stuff. And the whole time I was telling myself, I am never doing this again. I'm not doing this kind of test. Because after I did the Ford one, then the Chevy guys walked over and said, hey, we want you to do this for Chevy. I'm like, oh no, that's going to be a hard pass. Because there's even more small block Chevy heads probably at the time. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to happen. But I ended up doing it with big blocks. And I ended up doing it with LS's, Cathedral and Rec, and then LS7. I'm like, yeah, never say never, I guess. I have 464 valve heads that have been CNC ported by Fox Lake. Told them I wanted the hardware in the heads to support a lot of RPM, but also I'm running a competition ported Whipple. Okay. As long as the Whipple also with the Whipple blower will have a short enough runner length because it's got no runner length at all, basically. So that will work fine for RPM. Now will the Whipple flow, will that continue to work at whatever RPM you're wanting to go to? What's a good dual plane intake that will make power up to 6,500 on the Gen 6 big block? I wish there was a way to swap the LS style fuel injection, if that's possible, shooting for 550 horsepower. I think you're going to be hard pressed. Does that big block, is it still a 454? I think you're going to be hard pressed to get to 550 with the dual plane intake manifold. Maybe with a divider cut or a spacer or something, you might get there. But the only ones that I know of, and maybe Engine Masters or one of those guys, Freiberger and Brule and Dulcich, maybe they did a dual plane intake shootout for big blocks, so you can see which one was best. But usually our go-to is the RPM air gap. But it seems like 550 is in the range of a single plane intake manifold for a big block. Pitot tubes will show you dead spots. Yeah, we have those on the bench. I just never used them. But it's often just as easy to listen to the port. If it's noisy, it needs work. If it's quiet. And we would run some of them there where they would be very, very loud. Calvin is back to work on the North Star project. Have you guys seen the video yet? I haven't seen the North Star stuff. I'm attempting to build a 4.3 Vortec with a turbo and a 98 Olds Bravada. Poor man's Typhoon. I guess that's what I'm calling it, since I can't afford a Typhoon. So what fuel injection are you using on the 4.3? I would think tumble or swirl would be caused by sharp edges and or other restrictive surfaces on the intake and head. It doesn't have to be restrictive. Swirl can be induced, like I said, if you have one valve opening before the other, like and Honda's really good at stuff. So if you have one valve opening before the other, then it tends to induce, and the swirl is happening inside the combustion chamber. And they did a good job. Works really well. Just getting it mated to a gearbox seems like a pain. About the marine intake. Okay. So the intake's not going to be a problem. That's good. By the way, I got aluminum heads for the 4.3. So those arrived. And I got at least part of the 471 blower, but it's far from complete. It's mostly just the housing. I use flow balls more than pitot tubes. Both work. You could probably quantify it better with a pitot tube and a manometer than with the flow balls. Are flow balls like snowballs? There. Dan, were you here to see the king snake? Aluminum heads from where? For the Vortec? Yeah, for the 4.3, I got aluminum heads for it. They fell off the truck. I know a guy. And they're the earlier style intake pattern so that I can run that smoky unit kind of intake manifold on it. So I just need to make sure that I need to check the springs on them. I need to, I guess, check the chambers on them, see what those are. I don't know if I need different head gaskets for those compared to the Vortec heads. I don't think that they would be any different. How can you tell it? Yeah, look for the snowballs. Yeah, the difference between a snowman and a snow woman. So that will be good. So I can use the aluminum heads. I have a cam for it. We're going to run that. I can run that smoky intake manifold, which would be cool. But even better, I can run I have the lower intake manifold for the 471, which means I can also run an adapter plate and run an M90, which is awesome. Because I already have an M90 that's set up to run a carburetor. So we just put the distributor in there, put the M90, and away we go, man. We're good. The air comes in and curves around the cylinder. Yep. Swirl. Yeah, I'll have to do some. I'll do some of my use some of my Westech fabrication skills. But the nice thing is the adapter plate already mounts the blower on it. So all I have to do is position the adapter plate on the 471 manifold so that the pulley lines up. If I can get that right, and the discharge is over the opening, which is fairly generous in the 471 lower manifold, I can do that. Bingo. And then I got to make a pulley arrangement work. Is it 351? If a 351 is a tall deck 302, what do I need to put in place with a 302 and a Fox body? A roller 351 would be awesome. Nothing. A 351 goes in there, but the part of the problem is that hood clearance becomes an issue. Headers are a little bit different on a 351 than they are on a 302 because the 351, you've raised it up and pushed it out. So header clearance becomes more of an issue on the shock tower area. So you got to deal with that. I mean, it's not a lot, but it is some. I've seen that. I was really hoping he'd put the small block Chrysler pattern transmission on the North Star. Would have paid him really good money for one of the adapters. Okay. I'm sure he can make that if he has the pattern for one side of that. I mean, doing the other side shouldn't be bad. I have that adapter that man, I can't remember his name now. Why did it? I just had it and it just escaped me. He did the adapter for the Dodge V8 bell housing for the 2.2. So hoping Calvin would mount a TKX or a T56 to it. What is he putting on it? I always wanted to do one since 347s are so decent. A 351 should be good. Yeah, 351 will be even better because then you can make it a 408. Oh, a T10. Okay. Is it a super T10? Because then that's that's this much better than a T10. That's what we want. That marine intake and injection was ridiculously priced. Yeah, that's why I haven't tested one of those, because it is expensive. I would like to see. I'd like to see a comparison of that marine intake versus the factory intake, but with the spider injection, but with regular injectors. What's your opinion on dry sump oil systems? For a street car, I wouldn't do it. But for something for road racing, it's a good idea. Dry sumps are the best. But I don't think that's necessary for something that you're driving around, because you can't run enough G loads and stuff where that's going to be an issue. Unless you're taking to the Cletus's oval where they're racing around against each other, then oiling becomes a real issue for that. Get an AccuSump, spend the money elsewhere. An AccuSump solves a lot of what the issues that people have. Like for that kind of thing, an AccuSump probably would work great. I mean, we put an AccuSump when I was running World Challenge with the Mustang, and we had to run on part of the oval at I think maybe PIR, maybe in Phoenix. And so we were banked enough where the oil would want to go over to one side. So we put an AccuSump on it, worked fine. That would be nice if it was possible. Which marine intake? That one EFI tunnel ram on the Scorpion small block worked great. The marine intake has the injectors like external, and it's one of the go-to things. I just like to use, because weren't there 2 4-3 intakes? One of them had the poppet valves, but then the other one had same style intake. I think it's a 2-piece, a composite thing on top or whatever. And then, but one of the later ones had regular injectors in it, right? But still had a spider setup going to feed those or something. I'm not that savvy with the 4-3 stuff as much as I need to be. .3 liter V6 intakes. Now we don't want carbureted intakes. EFI intakes. There we go. That's right. That's better. None of those are EFI intakes. You guys are killing me. Silverado. See, I like that composite one. That's kind of cool. Marine intake swap. There. The revised Spider had the injectors at the top of the feed line. They use the same intake. The linear injectors were drop-in replacements for the poppet valves. Okay. We have a bunch of them way back in the day. Were those setups sequential injection? Or was it just all batchity batch? Batchy batch, don't talk back. You know how we do it. I saw the one, which I love online, where the guy where he cut up the Edelbrock ProFlow thing. He did a lot of work on that. During roll racing events, would a dry sump oil system be needed? I don't think so. I don't think you're accelerating hard enough for a dry sump. Is there a cam that you recommend for a Vortec engine in the setup that I'm planning to run? Is yours a 4.3 Vortec? They were sequential? Okay. I don't remember, Rob. Let me see. Oh, yeah. There's a few different ones. Unfortunately, I think that I don't know what year your motor is. Is it a hydraulic roller one or is it a flat tappet? There's limited cams available for that 4.3. The truck north size cam on a 351 and EFI, what turbo of yours would you use? Well, what kind of power are you trying to make? That's always the question. The cam that you use or the turbo that you use is always about how much power you want to make. And a truck Norris size cam is not what I'd put in a 351. I would not put a 212 cam in a 351. I'd put something bigger than that. Plenty of good junkyards in Maine due to rust. 13 to 99. Chevy trucks and vans are in abundance. What 6-liter would you pick, or even 6.2? It will end up being a Holly 650 deal. Well, if you can get, if it's going to be an NA, or it's going to be an NA thing, if you, and they're the same price, I would get an aluminum 6.2 as if it's going to be NA. The original Spider had the head on one end of the hose, then the tip at the other end, i.e. the hose was under injector pressure. Okay. The Gen 3 aluminum 5.3, I don't want to use for the car. If I go ahead and clean it up, put new rotating assembly, would it work as well on a jet boat application? An aluminum 5.3 will work fine. Oh, yours is an 03. Okay, so that's late enough. That should be a hydraulic roller. I run 163 millimeter throttle body on my Coyote. So is it a big like monoblade thing? Would you usually find 20 horsepower going to, or you could find 20 horsepower going to a dry sump? Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me more if you could pull 20 inches of vacuum, and possibly more if the thing that you're replacing is awful. Because we can get 20 sometimes on a big block going from a stock one just on the dyno without it moving around to a good oil pan. Sometimes we can get that just by changing the oil level. We can get quite a bit. I think the 302 would have made way more power if it had a better cam than stock. Which 302 are you talking about? Oh no, we're talking about modified ones. He cut the intake in half and welded it back together, but on the dyno for the 4.3 Vortec, he made no more power than the marine intake. He did do a lot of work on that 4.3. Oh, on the ProFlow one, the ProFlow one had to make more power than it should make more peak power. It might lose power compared to a factory one, which should be a much longer runner. Extremely new at the Ford Windsor stuff. I guess I should have asked what a 351 spool G42. Yeah, it will, but do you want 1200 horsepower? We're probably very shortly going to have a different turbo than we're going to have one between the 3584 and the G42, which I think will be good for a lot of applications. Richard, want to get a spare 300 and refresh it and put an M112 on it? Would you want to test that? Are you going to run it on something? If the oil pan was crap or the oil level was off, could have been even more. Yeah, it could be bad when the usually what happens, and this is especially the case with the big block stuff, when people bring them into Westech and you put in the amount of oil that they say that pan fits. Oh, this is a 8-quart pan or a 10-quart pan or 13-quart pan or whatever. You're like, no, it's not. I mean, it would hold that if you filled it to the top, but that's a terrible amount to put in there, because then we start take out a quart, take out a quart, take out a quart, and then you get down to where you're like, okay, now we're starting to go the other way. But it's never the amount that they're saying. Honestly, I'd like enough power if I could go fight a stock Hellcat. Okay. Oh, so you are going to want a G42 then for that. I'm gonna put it in the truck. Be down to bring it to West Tech on vacation week. Are you in Texas? We take the pan rate and subtract 3. Yeah, it is like, it's a lot like that. I mean, it's a bunch. And we after a while, we just got to the point where we're not even, I mean, we like to write it down so that we know later on, we could tell the people, like, look, if you're in a boat or whatever, you might want to put an extra cord in, but it's good. This thing's not going to want to be like, and then we remark the dipstick and everything. It's not going to want to be where, don't put 13 quarts in this thing. It's not going to want to do that. In West Texas, okay. Midland, Odessa, okay. I'm going to be coming out kind of in that area. I'm going to be going to Roswell, New Mexico. Got to pick up my Mustang, but we're going to be going through Texas because I got to take the car back to Georgia. Take the Mustang back there. Whoa. Are you running that thing fuel injected? You're running the 6-cylinder fuel injected? I'd love to run an inline the 300, but it has to be a fuely one, not a carbureted one. Bob Lazar, Area 51. Yeah, we called ours Area 52 because it was in Nevada, and so it was 51 adjacent. I'm now about to pick up a junkyard motor. It won't be for a while. It won't be till the weather gets better. We don't want the crankshaft to be sitting in oil. No, and we don't want it to dunk into oil either. That's bad. Factory EFI system. So how are you going to run that? Oh, on a Terminator. Okay, good. That's better. I was going to say, you're going to run a factory ECU on there? Not that that's bad, but it takes a little bit to get it to work, though. We're going to close out our pole at 6633 on the no side. No, they were not throttle body limited. They were everything else limited. Windage losses are a big thing. Crank scrapers help too. Yeah. I want to do a crank scraper and a baffle. I'd like to do windage tray too for the sprint motor. I think I haven't gotten around to do a cam sensor, so it's batch firing. Almost all the tests I do are batch fire, so I have no problem with that. Was told the heads were the limiting factor for what? 916. For the 300, I wouldn't surprise me. I can't imagine them being very good. Does your Honda have a dry oil system? My Honda didn't. No, the Bonneville car didn't, because the Bonneville Honda didn't really need it because we weren't. You're never side loading it or anything. It's just going straight. It's almost like a dyno pull. And it's not accelerating at any point where, it's not like we're dumping the clutch and taking off the line where you have a lot of G's when you're accelerating. So like I said, it's really a lot like a dyno test. Wave your hand when you come through Dallas. I kind of want to go to the Dallas area because I think that's where Chad Reynolds is. I think he's over in that area. I'd like to go by and see him. I thought all EFI switched to batch fire at certain RPM, sequential adjust for part throttle. A lot of them switch, go from sequential to batch when they're out of the cruising RPM. 2B, 4B. Sequential injection does that, but pure batch fire doesn't. Ooh. Finger. Snap. I'm okay. I'll make it. Yeah, when I run the LSs, I normally just run them as batch. I mean, I can run the L33. I can run sequential because it has all the sensors there, and I can run it like that. But it's not really necessary. I guess it shouldn't matter. I mean, it's just me plugging in one more plug, plugging in the cam sensor plug in the back. It's not a big deal. and then changing the designation in the Holly. What EFI system you use on the dyno? I normally run stuff on a Holly. I've also run the MS3 Pro and then the Haltech now, fast a long time ago. Some of the factory setups, like I've run Hondata on it before. Run the factory GM one for the LT motor that we ran, and then the factory setup for a Coyote also. -1 degree. Ooh, that is cold. It's 57 degrees warmer out here than that. I remember porting huge exhaust bumps out of a 5-liter head. Yeah, they have those thermactor bumps. Define batch. When the duty cycle goes over 80%, everything is pretty much batch. Yeah, it's static, right? If I remember my calculations, 20 milliseconds is static at 6,000 RPM, right? It's just on all the time. Frankensteining Gen 6, 454 heads on a Gen 5, 250 duration. 500 with the 250 cam. Do you have a single plane intake manifold or dual plane? I don't know. I don't know if the dual plane is going to make you get to 500. Maybe. The heads have enough flow for that. But let me know if you do that. 29 here. But at least not 0 again. That's better. Yeah. You could almost say natural aspirated horsepower is airflow times cubic inches times RPM. Wouldn't it be nice if it was like, if it mathed out like that? Here in Florida, it's getting up to 80. Yeah. I'm debating if I should just buy the Holly Terminator and use it or try and program the 0411. We got the guys from Holly sent me one of their Terminator X setups, the 4-hole throttle body thingy, so we can blow through it, which would be good for the 4.3. That means I can run that on the rather than a carburetor. I can run that on the, if I run the M90 blower, that would be good. And I kind of want to re-weld that carburetor flange on the M90. Let me take a look and see. We did some dual plane stuff for my boat engine that I did way back. Let me see here. Dyno results. Big block Chevy. 454. Yeah, that's not very spectacular. What is that? Oh. That's a flat tappet peanut port motor making 400. It's big power. Scrolling. Ooh, that's pretty stellar. 330 horsepower. Yeah, getting with the program. Test description. This one was the Edelbrock Performer RPM oval heads and a 224 cam. It's like 480 something. Let's see. File test description with a really big cam. Yeah, we had dome pistons in it with ported oval ports, but a 248 cam. That's a big cam. 240, 254. I was a Victor Jr. Yeah, that one made over 500, but it took a lot of stuff to get 511. So the Terminator X, you think will work with the marine intake also? Yeah, I don't think it cares what intake manifold you have on it. As long as it has as long as you have injector plugs and you give it a crank signal and then a TPS, I think you're fine. You all have a Fox TFI harness up at West Tech. I don't know. I'll have to ask Evan to see if they have that. We wouldn't run that though. We would run a standard distributor unless there isn't one for that. Normally we just run an MSD that has a plug. Darren Morgan's equation, CFM times 257 number of cylinders, potential horsepower. It's up to you. Yeah, that I just do it where we take the double the peak flow, and that gives you an idea. I'm glad that you actually have built and acknowledged the 4.3 Vortec. Most people just LS swap everything now in the Bravada. I would like to use an LS, but I believe it'll be a lot of fabrication. I go to the same plane and just want to wreck the bottom end power. Is there a happy medium? Yeah, I mean, you have a big block, so it's not, I mean, it does lose torque if you use a single plane versus a dual plane, but you still have a bunch. Because I'll need to keep my harness. You can get an HEI distributor for it, but there's no dual sync for the 300. I don't care about running it sequential. Does that motor have a does it have a crank sensor on it, or is it in the distributor? Nissan, what's going on? Any estimates on this combo? 289, 221 cam. I'm going to guess and say 350 RPM intake, something like that. Here in Hawaii, 77. Nice. That is nice. What do you think would be the most modest single plane that would get me to 500? The go-to for this stuff for big blocks is I think it's a 454R Victor Jr. Factory, it uses a TFI pickup for the cam and crank like a Fox 302. I'll ask them. I don't remember running I can call Evan tomorrow and find out though, to see if they have a harness that has the TFI plug on it, or if there is an adapter for that. When do you plan to do the 4.3 build with the M90? That's something I've always been curious about. I can get the M90 in my area for hardly nothing. Yeah, the M90 is not going to be a real easy doable thing. Like I'm only doing it because I have a 471 lower blower manifold, and that's not gonna be a cheap option to get. Young, what's going on? Holly doesn't have a default that can read the TFI cam signal for a 6, only for an 8. Oh yeah, it makes sense. Well, then if we had to, we could put a crank sensor on it. So hoping you could help me with my tune. Yeah, I don't have a, well, we'll have to figure out what if it's possible to run that. because I'm sure if he has a harness for that and it's a TFI, it's definitely going to be a V8. I have a 4.8. I'm trying to get 480 or 470 with the carburetor build. Well, you saw what I had to do to get, we made 472 or something, but that takes everything. So it takes a really big cam. It takes like professionally ported cylinder heads, and it takes what I would argue is probably the best intake manifold. And so you're probably not going to get there with a carbureted intake manifold. And unless you have really, really good ported heads, you're also probably not going to get there. Anderson makes one for the remote unit. I can give you, I also have an integral module connector. The harness is identical to the V8 except for injectors. Okay. Yeah, if it accepts the signal, and then the harness would be the same anyways. We just aren't going to hook up two of the cylinders. It's just going to be batch anyways. It's going to go this side and that side. 706 or 862s. Yeah, you're not going to get there with that. You should be worried about getting to 380 and not 480 with stock heads on it. You just use a custom ignition setup. Yeah, that's what I do when I run the LS. I got to go trick my water for the dozen time. Why does a small block Ford make LS power? Is it mostly the heads or the short blocks improvements too? Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. One of them has a windage tray. One of them has way better cylinder heads. One of them has a way better intake manifold. 2 extra injector connectors might melt. How are the injector connectors going to melt? I don't think that's a thing. We did that on the we did that both on the 3800 V6 and then also on the 4-cylinder Dodge. What temperature range you say is generally too high for forced induction air temperatures, and when does power start to suffer? Can high octane and fuel content cancel out the high inlet air temperatures? No, high octane can't cancel out the power loss that you get from higher inlet air temperatures. It can help suppress the detonation that might cause, but it's not going to help with power, and it's not going to change the temperature of the inlet air unless you're injecting the fuel somewhere else now with this different higher octane fuel. Exhaust manifold being so close to the rail. Yeah, we'll just zip time up out of the way. That's not a problem. I always thought higher octane has less energy. What? Where do you get that from? Higher octane is not an energy thing. Higher octane just suppresses detonation. That's all it is. It's a resistance to detonation. It's not. It doesn't determine. It doesn't determine energy content that I know of. It also doesn't determine burn rate. It doesn't determine a lot of things that people often associate with different octane fuels. We got 1 more minute. And yeah, this thing that a motor makes more power on 87 octane rather than 91. I haven't ever seen that. I would like to, but then you'd have to also look at not just the octane rating. You have to look at what specifically did this fuel blend have that this fuel blend didn't have. Like, what is that? Other than octane, what other thing changed? One of these things is not like the other one. Good times, good times. Yeah, young one, you're gonna need lots of head flow and a really big cam, like a 230-ish kind of cam. You're gonna need heads that flow 300 CFM. You're gonna need, like, the fast intake is really good because it allows enough RPM on the 4.8, where I would argue that it doesn't allow enough RPM on like a 6-liter. You can make more power with higher RPM manifolds. A 4.8, I haven't seen a single plane be beneficial. I haven't seen a high ram either be that beneficial. It might be at some RPM, but it's only going to do that if you have enough head flow to go along with the, like, where you're wanting the cam, the intake manifold to make power. Stock heads are not going to do that. Thanks for the draw through stuff. Yeah, that was fun. Even though I got yelled at by all the draw through guys, but that's pretty par for the course. On that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up, and I will be back tomorrow. Go to richardoldnerperformance.com. Get lots of stuff. You know, it's March. It's a whole new month. It's time to buy turbos and stuff.